directed by Zack Snyder or Joss Whedon, who knows. The plot basically is the Justice League, so you've got Batman, Superman, Cyborg, Aquaman, Wonder Woman. They all get together to stop Steppenwolf from collecting free mother boxes, which will help him take over the world, Earth. And yeah, that's basically the plot. And for those of you that have been following me for a while now will know I have been really looking forward to Justice League. I really wanted to love the film. If you were to ask me who do I prefer, DC or Marvel, it's DC. I'm a big DC fanboy, don't get me wrong. I love the Marvel movies and I love what they're doing with them. But my heart lies with DC, and I was really, really looking forward to Justice League, and I really wanted to love it. Let's go ahead into my review of one of my most anticipated movies of the year. Overall, this was an enjoyable experience. It's a very fast-paced movie. It really doesn't stop, and which surprised me because they managed to squeeze a lot of really nice character moments in the movie, which was surprising because the pacing is so quick in this film and you've got action scene after action scene. They did manage to squeeze in some really nice character moments, and it would be moments like with Bruce Wayne and Barry Allen, The Flash, or Bruce Wayne and Diana, or Diana and Cyborg, and it was those moments which helped introduce you to the characters and, you know, sort of develop the characters a little bit, but it still wasn't enough and it felt rushed overall. I wanted more, and it was those scenes, it felt as if there was something missing, as if a lot had been cut from these characters' backgrounds, especially when it comes to The Flash and Cyborg and Aquaman even. But mainly when it comes to the character Cyborg, I really felt there were moments or scenes missing when it comes to the character and his past and developing the character, as well as with the other characters as well. Even though this film does contain some really nice character moments, there just wasn't enough of them, and it all just felt overall just rushed. Everything just felt rushed. Even when it comes to the editing was very choppy and chaotic. This film, in a way, was more of a montage of really cool action scenes. And even though those character moments and their introductions are very limited, I do feel like it's within those moments they really did showcase their different personalities. And I kind of liked that. Like, there's a really nice moment between two characters that I really, really liked. It's been in the trailers as well, I think. But there's a scene with Batman and the Flash just before they go and rescue some people from Steppenwolf. And Batman says to the Flash, because the Flash doesn't want to, he's afraid. He says to Batman, the only thing I'm used to doing is pushing people and running. And Batman says, just save one person. And the Flash goes, well, then what? And Batman replies, you'll know. And there were a lot of little moments like that scattered throughout the movie in between all the big action set pieces. And I appreciated those, and I liked them. But it still felt like there was an awful lot missing when it comes to character development. There really needed to be more development with these characters so we could become more emotionally attached to them. And yeah, those moments like that between Flash and Batman, they're nice moments, but it needed more. And especially when it comes to the character Cyborg. Now, from what I've been reading, the Cyborg was going to be the heart of this story. For me, he was actually one of the weakest characters in the story, and his role is actually quite pivotal, I felt. Anyway, for me it was, and I felt like his character just needed a little bit more developing, and we just needed to get a little bit more emotionally attached to his character, because I really like what Ray Fisher did with the character Cyborg. He added a lot of warmth to this character, which I liked, and I dug what he did. But I just needed to see more about him and his past, and he didn't really explore that, and it just all felt rushed. And when it comes to all the other characters and performances, apart from one, which I will get into, I dug them all. Obviously, Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, as amazing as usual. You got Jason Momoa as Aquaman. I absolutely loved what he did with that character, and I'm looking forward to seeing the standalone Aquaman film later next year. I also really, really loved Ezra Miller as Barry Allen, the Flash. What he did with that character, very funny, very quirky, and also he came across as very, very innocent as well, which is what I thought the character needed. But yeah, I really dug what he did with that character. Performance-wise, yeah, they all really give it their best, and I really dug the performances from everyone, apart from one. But you've got all these different characters, you've got very, very different characters, and they get together to fight against Steppenwolf. But that's about it. There's nothing more to it. And that was one of my biggest disappointments, was it didn't really explore these characters enough to sort of really grow emotionally attached to them and care for them. You quickly introduced to them, they team up straight away and they fight against Steppenwolf. There's no real chemistry between, or conflict between all of them, between the team, and that's what I really wanted. I wanted there to be this chemistry, because they're not all going to get on. They are going to bicker, and there's a slight bicker here and there, but there wasn't enough chemistry between the team, I felt, and enough interaction and conflict to have this sort of real interesting dynamic going on. And it felt very bland as a result, and it was just very sort of, they team up, fight against Steppenwolf, and that's that. And there was just nothing special about it. It all just felt very sort of too convenient. Yeah, I needed there to be more of a chemistry and a conflict and a dynamic between the group, because they're all very, very different characters. And for me, this was just more of it felt like they just needed to get these characters together to bring out a Justice League film, and that was that. There was nothing special about it, and why these characters have been brought together. The plot is pretty simple, the reason's pretty simple. Steppenwolf have come, he needs 3 mother boxes, they've got to stop him, that's that. So they really needed to explore these characters more, especially when it comes to Cyborg. But it felt very flat and underwhelming. Now let's just talk about Ben Affleck for a moment. When it comes to performances, Ben Affleck was very disappointing as Batman. Now, I was one of those fans when Ben Affleck was first announced to be playing Batman in Batman v Superman. I was like, no, I cannot see that happening. I just wasn't a fan of the idea of Ben Affleck playing Batman. Then Batman v Superman came out, and he blew everyone, as well as me, away. I loved what he did with the character in Batman v Superman. It was dark, it was gritty, he was brutal, and I loved it. Now we've got this sort of lighter, fluffier version of Batman, and I don't know if it's because of the change in direction and tone that his performance suffered, or because Ben Affleck looked very uninspired in this film. He looked bored, and whether that be because of the change in direction or, I don't know. But his performance was very flat in this film. I did not like his portrayal of Batman or Bruce Wayne in this movie. It wasn't the same Batman we were introduced to in Batman v Superman, put it that way. And I was very, very disappointed by Ben Affleck's performance. Yeah, he looked bored, he looked uninspired, he looked like he wasn't interested anymore, and it was a lighter, fluffier version of the character, I felt, compared to what we'd seen in Batman v Superman. I liked that version. Right, and the villain is probably one of the weakest villains I've ever seen on screen, Steppenwolf. It was almost as if they put a Marvel villain into a DC film. Yeah, very, very weak. You don't really know much about him or his past and why he's doing what he's doing. Like, you understand why he's doing, what he's doing, but that's about it. There's nothing there to really become emotionally attached or understand why he's doing it. He's just doing it. He wants to get his 3 mother boxes, and he wants to take over Earth and prove himself to Darkseid and all of that. And there's just nothing more to the character, and you don't really truly understand his motives. And yeah, very, very weak. Very, very just underwhelming. A very flat character. And CGI, when it comes to the CGI, because this character is all CGI, very, very poor. I was not impressed with the CGI on Steppenwolf. It looked unfinished, in fact. I just want to mention the action scenes. I really dug most of the action scenes in this movie. And in a way, this film did just feel, overall, it felt like a montage of really cool action scenes. And as a result, ended up being an enjoyable experience for me, even though it was a disappointing one. There was this one scene I have to talk about briefly, and that is on Themyscira. And basically, Steppenwolf has to get the mother box. And it was a brilliant scene. It was very exciting, and the way it just played out, it became very tense. And I just loved that scene, and it was one of the best action scenes, I feel. Not the best, but one of the best within the DCEU so far. You know, it was very exciting, it was very intense, it was very dramatic, and you've got Steppenwolf, and he's after this mother box, and the Amazons are trying to get it away from his grasp. And just the way that entire scene played out was brilliant. I actually had a big grin on my face. But that moment was during the first act of the film. And that is the only moment during the entire film where I did actually have a smile on my face. The script. Oh my god, the script made me cringe in places. There were moments in which the lines certain characters would deliver felt forced. It felt unnatural. It didn't feel natural enough, and it just stood out. And the humour, I felt, was also very forced. And apart from the Flash, for me, it just didn't work when it comes to the humour. And overall, when it comes to the script, it felt very Marvelised. And what I mean is, you know, Marvel, they are trying to inject that sort of Marvel formula when it comes to tone and humour. And I think it's the most evident it has been in Justice League. It just felt very, very Marvelised. I mean, some of the lines they say in this film, you could tell Joss Whedon had sort of gone in there and sort of rewritten the screenplay. It just felt like, at times it felt like I was watching a Marvel film. It didn't work. It felt unnatural. It felt forced. And there were some lines that characters would say, Wonder Woman being one of them actually, and it just made me cringe. When it comes to tone, for me, it was just too light and fluffy. And if you compare Justice League to Batman v Superman, the difference in tone is very, very evident. It's obvious. And for me, it just didn't work. And for me, this movie didn't really have a distinct identity or look about it. There was nothing. It looked very dull. It looked very bland. Like with Batman v Superman, Zack Snyder's got this very distinct style and look about his films, and I dig that look. In this didn't even look like a Zack Snyder movie. It sounded like a Joss Whedon film, but it really didn't look. Apart from the very few slow-mo moments there were in it. It didn't look like a Zack Snyder film, and it looked dull, it looked bland, and it's just nothing special. Now, what I was surprised by was the fact that this wasn't another Suicide Squad, as in, when I was watching Suicide Squad, it looked as if there were two different movies overlaying each other. You were watching a sort of lighter, fluffier version, and there was a darker version just underneath. And with Suicide Squad, it was very evident and noticeable that the reshoots had occurred, and it didn't work. It was very inconsistent, and you had moments which were quite dark, and then you'd have moments which the tone was all over the place with Suicide Squad. It's not so much the case with Justice League. With Justice League, the tone was a little bit more consistent. Just for me, it didn't work. Because it just didn't work. I didn't like it. And even though the film as a whole was very sort of more consistent and worked better than it should have, it still, for me, stood out as being, I can see where they've gone there. I can see what they've changed there. They wanted to, change the tone. They wanted to make it lighter. And for me, it was obvious in that way, but as an overall viewing experience, was just a lot more consistent than Suicide Squad was. Because of that radical change in tone, the screenplay, with Joss Whedon being brought in with the screenplay, it didn't feel like this film belonged within the DCEU. The DCEU that we, started with Man of Steel. I adored Man of Steel. I really liked Batman v Superman. And I've always said the tone was never the issue with these films. And what they've gone and done with Justice League is they've radically changed the tone. And for me, it just stood out and it just didn't work. Especially when it comes to these characters that we were introduced to back with Man of Steel and Batman v Superman. And it also lacked threat and urgency. Like, the action scenes are exciting, but they really lacked that threat and urgency that they needed. Because as a result, these action scenes, they just happen. Apart from one, actually, the scene on Themyscira, that actually did have, like I said, it was a very tense scene, and it had that threat to it, and it had a sense of urgency. But that was the only moment in the film. thinking about it, for me, it's probably one of my favourite moments out of the entire movie, and it worked. It was really good, and it was really intense, and it was really exciting, and it had threat and urgency. But that was it. For the rest of the movie was just sort of empty, and even though the action is exciting, it just happens. And as a result, it ends up being a rather bland and dull experience overall. Like, by the end of it, I can see why a lot of people would find this film forgettable. And it doesn't help that the CGI wasn't really that great either. Like I've explained with the villain itself was sort of very weak and dull and bland looking. But overall, the CGI in this film, there were moments where it was like, oh, that doesn't look finished. And I'm going to mention it. Henry Cavill's moustache. Yeah, it's noticeable. Did it bug me? No. But yeah, you can see it. But yeah, overall, the fact that the CGI was also very dull, weak, and felt, again, it added to that emptiness. And there were also a lot of, like, going back to tone and that. And there were a lot of light-hearted moments injected into this film that really stood out and made me cringe. Like, there's one moment where Superman is brought back to life, okay? Batman's reaction to this is I almost felt that sort of Batman and Robin vibe from that moment. You know, it felt forced, it didn't work, and it was like, oh, really? So overall, it really lacked any sort of depth and emotion and weight that Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and Wonder Woman had. There was just nothing really special about it. It was very empty and shallow, and there was nothing to really make you care for what was happening. Or, this film lacked heart, which is, the other movies had heart. This really didn't have heart. It was just light and fluffy and empty. And going back to humour, the humour worked with the character Flash, and there was a moment where he's in a queue, and he does something to this guy behind him that's sort of like, oh, come on, mate, hurry up, I'm waiting you. And he turns around, he does something with a pen. I found that really nice. It was really funny. There was moments like that didn't feel forced. It felt natural. But then you had other moments where the humour just really did feel forced. And Superman's return really lacked emotional clout. And again, there was something about the way that moment happened, the way the scene sort of played out. I don't know, it almost felt like a reshoot. The rebirth of Superman in this film felt like a reshoot, as if originally he came back in another way, in another sort of, through another storyline. Maybe Zack Snyder's version, maybe his original version did bring Superman back in a slightly different way, because in this, it just didn't feel right. Am I the only one that thinks that? Let me know below. It felt like a reshoot, and it also just lacked the emotional clout that I felt it needed. And it was like, oh, Superman's back now, and that was it. It was just nothing. It felt empty. I keep using the word empty. There is a moment during this confrontation between Superman and the rest of the team, and the Flash goes into his Speed Force superpower. And so everything's in slow motion for him. And he's looking at Superman. But Superman can notice him. And he's watching him, and he just stares at him as the Flash is circling him. And it was a really cool moment. It was almost creepy. Just the way that Superman is glaring at the Flash. And it was I like that. And this movie does not recognize society. All you've got is your character, your superheroes. You've got Lois Lane, you've got Gordon, you've got Alfred, you've got Martha, and then a little family in Russia. And that's it. And as a result, it added to that lack of threat and urgency that this film needed, because it just doesn't recognize, or you don't see the rest of society. So it's like, who are these people trying to save? Like, yeah, they're trying to save Earth, but it's like, whereas the other movies recognized society and the fact that they looked, or they related to characters like Superman as being this sort of biblical figure. And I liked that. And, those movies like Batman v Superman and Man of Steel, it added a lot more depth and meaning, and it explored deeper themes. With Justice League, it throws all of that out the window, and you've just got this shallow, exciting experience, which is forgettable. And by having society sort of relate and connect and to these characters and recognize these characters like Superman and Cyborg. For me, it grounds the film in reality, and they just, like I said, they throw that out like they do. They look at Superman in the previous films as being this biblical figure, and for me, that grounded the movie in reality, and it made it feel a bit more real, because that's how the world really, I think, would react with something like that happening if it really did happen. And I like the fact that those movies explored that, as in to say, in reality, in our reality, what if a Superman arrived? How would the world react when it comes to religion and all of that? And I like that, and I think people just got a bit afraid of that, and they just threw it out for Justice League. So yeah. And the music by Danny Elfman, I thought, I was actually a bit disappointed, really, because again, very forgettable. Apart from those odd moments where you'd get, the classic Batman 1989 theme. There was a slight a very subtle moment of that theme, as well as John Williams' classic Superman theme in there. Overall, again, just like the film, there was nothing really special about it. Nothing really stood out. So I was very disappointed when it came to the score for Justice League, because I'm a big fan of Danny Elfman. And there was also moments of the music which reminded me a little bit of the Avengers. When the team are all together and they go in to rescue the world, there was something about that score. I'm not even sure what the name of that particular piece of music is, but it reminded me of the Avengers theme. And for me, it just did not work. This was not the Justice League I wanted. Very disappointed. It was very flat, dull, empty, but exciting. It was an exciting movie because it had some really cool and exciting action scenes in it. But overall, it felt like a cool montage of really exciting, cool action scenes with some really nice character moments squeezed in between, and that was it. There was nothing really special about it. And I could see potential in this film. There was potential of there being a good film. But it just, for me, it really did. It disappointed me so much. Like, performance-wise, they all give it their best, apart from Ben Affleck, who seemed very bored and uninspired. The CGI was very, very weak. It was not a disaster, like I think a lot of people were thinking. It's a watchable movie, and I think a lot of people are going to enjoy it. But for someone who sort of just prefers that darker, grittier and tone, that more realistic tone, they're going to be disappointed. For those of you that love Batman v Superman and adored Man of Steel, and even Wonder Woman, I think you're going to be disappointed with Justice League. You're going to have a fun time with it. Overall, it was just a very empty and bland experience, which is not what you want to be thinking. Or you don't really want to be thinking that or hearing that when you've got, when it comes to Justice League. I mean, how long have we been waiting to see a live action adaptation of Justice League on the big screen when you've got all these characters together? This film should have been amazing, and I wanted to really love it. So down to all the issues I had, I mean, and especially if you consider everything that's gone on behind the scenes with this movie. The reshoots, bringing Joss Whedon in to sort of relook at the script and the screenplay and all of that. This film works a lot better than it should have. Like I said, there's not once where it really sort of throws you out the film. Like, for me, there were things that stood out, but it didn't throw me out the film. They were just more of changes in direction and tone and changes in character as well. I mean, characters would do things that I didn't expect them to do, mainly Batman's character. Overall, this film just worked a hell of a lot better than it should have. And it was more of a consistent experience than Suicide Squad was. So as a whole, it sort of just holds together. Like, I had a lot of issues with it, and a lot of those issues are just things that I just didn't like the direction in which they went. Being such a big fan of the previous movies, I just think the direction they've gone in now is just, I just don't like it. So yeah, there were things that I liked about the film, but there were a lot of things that I didn't like about the film as well. I liked the character moments, I liked most of the performances, and the action scenes were very entertaining, especially that Themyscira scene. With the Amazons trying to stop Steppenwolf from getting the mother box. That was an incredible scene. But overall, just a lot of the things that were injected into this movie when it comes to tone and humour, for me, just felt forced. The film overall did feel a little bit rushed as well, and the editing was very chaotic. But for me, as a fan, it was a disappointment. For me, it's one of the weakest entries in the DCEU. I do not think it's as good as Man of Steel and Batman v Superman and Wonder Woman. It's about the same. I regard this movie as being around the same as Suicide Squad. It actually works a little bit better than Suicide Squad, considering the two films had the same issues. There was a lot of reshoots that went on, and Justice League was just a more of a consistent experience than Suicide Squad was, and it all worked a little bit better than it should have in Justice League. So yeah, they are my opinions and thoughts of Justice League. I will be giving it a C. So, what do you guys think of Justice League? Let me know below. Did you agree or disagree with me? Please let me know. And again, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And if you like what you see and you share the same passions as me, then why not hit subscribe?